Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the hybrid joint meeting of the Children's and Families and the Education Overview Scrutiny Committees, which is open to the press and the public. The meeting this morning is being broadcast live, and a recording of the meeting will be made available as soon as possible after the meeting has concluded. We welcome the use of the Welsh language at meetings, but I've had no request for people to speak in Welsh today, so the meeting will be conducted in English only. Please can I remind members to refrain from using the chat function and instead use the raised hand icon to indicate when you want to speak. May I remind members that as per statutory guidance made under Section 4 of the Local Government Wales Measure 2011 and our formally adopted hybrid meeting policy, any member attending a meeting remotely must be able to be seen and heard by members and officers who are attending the meeting, as well as by members of the public viewing the meeting. So can I ask and remind you, please use your cameras for the duration of the meeting. Can I also remind you to keep your microphones muted when you are not talking. Please do not interrupt discussions until you've notified of your intention to speak and you've been invited to do so. Jade, do we have any apologies this morning, please?
Thanks, Chair. I've had apologies from Councillor John James.
Thank you. And this apology to be noted from Councillor Clark, who is unwell at the moment, so we wish him a speedy recovery. And Councillor Lucy Williams, we had apologies from her yesterday. We move on to agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest?
I'm a governor at Nantcelyn School and I've got a grandchild in Cwmbran High.
So, Caroline?
Yeah, I've got a granddaughter in Esclog Winclew.
Liam?
Governor at Glenavon Heritage School and Aberystwyth School, and a brother at, brother at Aberystwyth School as well.
David?
Yeah, I'm a governor at Blantyre Community Primary School. I've got 2 children in there and a child at Cross Killiog.
Rose? Yeah. Oh, there you go. I think Rose has got a problem with her. Yeah, should use mine. Okay, try it. No, it's not wrong.
Yeah, so I'm a governor at Allied of the Angels Primary School and Cwmbran High School.
I'm a governor at Glenavon Heritage School and I have a grandson at Aberystwyth Comprehensive.
John Cunningham, I'm a governor of St Albans, area governor.
I'm on the management committee at the Prue. I have great-grandchildren at Blenheim Road and Coediva and a grandchild at YGG.
Vicky.
Parent Governor Esclog Pantig.
This is the first joint meeting of the 2 committees, Children's and Families and Education and Overview. So therefore we don't have a set of meetings, minutes or an action sheet to consider. Before we move straight onto our substantive items for the meeting, may I go around the table and ask everyone to introduce themselves because it's the first joint meeting. So could you do that, please? Can we start with...
I'm Councillor Rose Seaborn. I'm the Chair of the Education Overview and Scrutiny Committee.
Morning, I'm Simon Rushton. I'm a team manager for family support and early intervention in Children and Family Services.
Good morning, I'm Kirsty Cook. I'm a group manager in Children and Family Social Services.
Good morning, I'm Charlotte Dickens. I'm the Early Years Manager.
Good morning, everyone. Andrew Rothwell, Head of Learning and Achievement.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Andrew Powells, Director of Education.
Councillor David Thomas for Glantarn Ward.
Councillor Liam Cowles, Glenavon Ward.
Councillor Caroline Price, Pontypool Vale. Councillor Colette Thomas, Tullochs and Hendricks Ward.
John Cunningham, co-opted member from the Archdiocese of Cardiff.
Councillor Jane Watkins, Fairwater Ward.
Vicky?
Co-opted member, parent representative for Esclog Pantig.
I'm Councillor John Jones for the Glenavon Ward and Chair of the Children's and Families. And Jacqueline is online.
Good morning, Jacqueline Richards, Head of Children and Family Services.
Okay. Thank you all. I would like to take the opportunity on behalf of the committee to thank Charlotte and Emma for arranging a suite of visits for members of the two committees over the last week to see the range of early years services and interventions being delivered within our communities. The visits were extremely informative. Can we please ask you to pass on our thanks to all members of your staff, to the service users and to the representatives we spoke to over the course of the 4 visits. It was absolutely brilliant. The welcome we had was tremendous and we learned an awful lot. So thank you all.
Thank you, and I will pass that on to our team. Thank you.
Okay. Office and members, we've read the report and prepared a series of questions. So are you happy for us to go straight into those questions, please? The first question is from myself, and it's relevant for paragraph 3.2 of the report. The Regional Gwent Best Start in Life Strategic Group is a newly established area of a focus group that will report to the PSB. It will embed the 8 Marmot principles, which also link into the County Plan's 9 wellbeing objective. What is the remit of this strategic group? In terms of the link with the County Plan wellbeing objectives, is early years provision sufficiently prioritised, considering its impact on a range of determinations, such as education outcomes, health, employability and children's social care?
The 3.2 in terms of the Best Start in Life Strategic Group has recently been established following the work into the Early Years Transformational Programme, which concluded in March this financial year. It's a new established group. We've met on 2 occasions, and it's been led by a PSB, a public health lead will chair those meetings, and with our health colleagues, local authorities, in terms of priorities across the early intervention and early years service. We have gone back to PSB in terms of looking at their key objectives for the following year, narrating them down, but it's also looking at the health agenda programmes in terms of early intervention and local authorities' early intervention programmes under the grants. I don't know if Andrew wants to come in terms of the strategic element across the different areas.
So, yeah, just in terms of the county plan, okay, we talked about the draft yesterday and cross-cutting scrutiny. Flying Start expansion is part of the plan. Also within the education improvement plan, which we're currently redrafting, early years is a key priority under objective 4, which we're looking at lifelong learning through from 0 to 25 particularly. That links to ALN transformation, on which we now got responsibility from 0 to 25 for all young people. So in terms of, is it high enough priority, I'd say yes, because it's reflected in the county plan. It's got a specific objective within the education improvement plan and within Charlotte's team plan, the expansion of Flying Start, and the continuation of ALN transformation is a high priority. Early identification and prevention is a key part of the local authority work, and looking at revised prevention services is a key thing at the moment, led by Dave Leach and Jason. So again, as part of that and the integration of children's services and education, it's a significantly high priority.
Anybody else want to come in on that question? Dave?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just wanted to dial into it a little bit more, just to ask, what specific Marmot principles does the strategic group aim to address first, and how do these align with the county plan's wellbeing objectives?
With Gwent being a regional Marmot authority, early years have been driving that piece of work forward in partnership with key strategic leads across those different organisations. In terms of the priorities, which I think I concluded at the end of the report, be with me, it's looking at the health elements in terms of the delivery of the core health delivery and the early years core programme, which is led by Health, is our Healthy Wells Child programme, and that promotion of health benefits in terms of early intervention, the area that we can work with families, looking at the immunisation rates, looking at breastfeeding rates. We know that has a long-term impact on health benefits. So that is sort of being at the moment, if you like, looked at as part of the established group, and in sort of looking at that strategic element from PSB to nail down those performance measures against that.
No, they were listed at 3.2 of the report. Shall I answer my next question?
Yes. We move on to question 2.
What roles does the LA and local communities fill in delivering early years services? You mentioned LA, but the local communities now, I think we're probably more concerned about. How do we ensure that we are providing services and interventions that are needed and not duplication of services that may already exist in the community? Yeah, you can read it there if you want to. What roles does the LA and local communities fulfil in delivering early years service? How do we ensure we are providing services and interventions that are needed and not a duplication of services that may already exist in the community?
Sure. So if I answer it from a sort of families first perspective, when we get referrals into families first, then we look at which services are already involved with the family, and then we try to understand the needs so that we don't duplicate anything and bring in the right service at the right time. So that's a key part of the families first sort of ethos, and early years as part of our families first offer. In terms of kind of early years provision, it might be one for Charlotte to come in.
Yeah, in terms of early years provision, as you see in with the report, Flying Start is an offer to families within that Flying Start area, and if they're in the core Flying Start area, they would be entitled to the 4 elements, which is the enhanced health visiting, the childcare, parenting support and early language support. Back in 2016-17, as part of the 0 to 1,000 Days project that we were part of, in collaboration and working with key partners across the early years system, we looked at elements of that offer, in particular the parenting and the early language support, and how we could reach that offer across Torfaen to all families at need at that right time. So we've been able to do that within terms of joint facilitation of programmes, so we're able to widen our reach across Torfaen. So those 2 elements of Flying Start, the families can access, and they can access by self-referral, or it could be an early years officer or a health team member through identification through their early years core offer of the assessments that they do on children. They could be a request into that provision. In terms of duplication, and under the early years transformational programme, that was part of that work at looking at the systems and the pathways into services. And what we identified for that system, that we want to avoid duplication, and we wanted to ensure that we used our capacity and resource efficiently. So we embedded the what matters, conversation, and we looked at our request referrals into services. Previously, under the Flying Start guidance, when it was first rolled out, it was quite prescriptive in terms of what we provided in terms of evidence-based family programmes, which are really key for some of our families. However, if a family was presenting with a child who was saying that with behavioural problems, there was then an offer to come along to a 10-week family link programme. With the What Matters process, it's really having that What Matters conversation with the family, and sometimes it might be environmental factors that are contributing to that change in behaviour in the home, and that's where we work in key collaboration with housing officers. So, it's looking at who is the right service at that right point of time. Services can also request what matters meetings. It does take a lot of investment in time, but we look at that request coming in. The officer has to have a what matters conversation with the family, and then before we meet, we make sure we have the relevant organisations around, and that also avoids duplication. So an example I can give of that, the Families First representation on what matters always attends those meetings. Because they might have had a referral direct into Families First, and we've closed down those in those meetings because we're able to offer that early intervention across early years. We also have representation on Family First and Space and Wellbeing from early years, and they will also come to us with inquiries before they would allocate that at work, that how we can work together if they're already having an intervention provided across early years. And we also have inquiries from our MASH team as well. If they've had a referral in, it's not statutory, it's an early years child, then they will contact us to see what involvement we have. If at that time they're universal offer with us, but obviously things have changed, and then we will then work with the health team to do that visit, because that family might need intensive support. So we do represent across all the different organisations, and especially with the What Matters programs, we strengthened our relationships with housing in particular. I'll give you another example. In Glenavon area, we had a family that was being offered early intervention support. They weren't engaging, it was an offer. However, the housing officer had a really good relationship with that family. So through that What Matters meeting and process, we did some joint work to build that relationship, and that parent now is accessing early intervention groups. So, avoiding duplication, but also building that relationship. So, yeah, I would say that we've got quite a strong collaboration of working across the different areas.
Thank you. Can I have a supplementary?
Yeah, of course you can.
Can you remind members how many flying start areas we have in the borough, please?
So at the moment, we are... the Flying Start started back in 2007, and it was predominantly around school catchment areas at that time. So we have Glenavon, Thornhill, Pennegarn, and Trevethyn, and we have areas down the south of Cumbraen. Even though Flying Start is not in all the areas, like I just said, the parenting offer, early language support offer, is available for all families across Torfaen. It is predominantly funded by Flying Start and from elements of the outreach element from Flying Start, but joint facilitation from our health team and across Families First and CCG projects. In terms of the childcare element, it is predominantly for those Flying Start, but what we have done in early years, we've looked at our early intervention where we had different grants, we used to have different panels across those grants, and we've tried to remove those barriers and focus on the child's needs at the centre. So we have developed a single point of access, our early intervention panel. So if there are children not living in a Flying Start area that are identified through a health assessment with a need, they can put a request into the early intervention panel. That support and intervention can look like an early years officer supporting that family, it could be one-to-one or group intervention. It could be childcare support fees, and we've brought that in line with Flying Start to 12.5 hours. So even though, and with the phase 2 rollout, we're hoping that there could potentially be further phase rollout of that 2.5 funding, dependent on Welsh Government's announcements. But I know there's a strong commitment for that to happen. So, yes, there are gaps in terms of our Flying Start areas, but we've tried to model a service that families can access, especially with those children that are identified with emerging needs.
We move on to the next question. Okay. It's from Councillor Colette Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. It's relation to 3.4. A draft proposal for phase 3 delivery has been submitted to Welsh Government. What timescale are Welsh Government working to in terms of considering proposals and conveying outcomes of proposals?
So we were asked by Welsh Government to submit a proposal of what it would look like in Torfaen if we were to roll out the 2.5 childcare across Torfaen. We haven't been given any time frame in terms from Welsh Government, other than that there is a commitment, but in terms of our plan, we were asked to submit a plan of what it would look like from the 1st of April. So our plan that we propose is a 3-year rollout, because it's really key that we need to ensure that we work with our sector, predominantly our childcare providers, but also to ensure that we have got the support in terms of our advisory service, because childcare is implies that around the quality of provision. So in answer to that, no sort of further time frame from a decision from Welsh Government, other than our project proposal was to be submitted and what it would look like in time from the 1st of April, and we've submitted a 3-year rollout.
Okay, Councillor Thomas, do you want to come in, please?
Yeah, just a quick one, please. Do you have a contingency plan if the proposal is not approved?
Not in terms of the rollout for childcare, because obviously that we're reliant on the funding and the grant coming in, and we would then, look in terms of how we can manage the funding out of Flying Start Outreach, because we have to acknowledge, obviously, services and supplies have gone up, staff salaries have gone up, but we've tried to align it, and in terms of the early intervention, where we looked at bringing it in line for those children with emerging needs, so there is an offer if it's identified. We did that model in terms of hoping that the phase 3 will be a rollout, because that becomes sustainable with the grant coming in. But that's something we would have to revisit on our existing provision that we're providing.
Councillor Thomas. Okay, we move on to our next question, and it's the service provision relating to 4.20 of the report. Service provision is open to any childcare provider who would like an experience being a Flying Start provider, but with a small number of children. What are the benefits to childcare providers in becoming Flying Start providers? And do we actually approach independent providers to encourage them to become Flying Start providers?
Yeah, so in terms of the Flying Start Flying Start offer in terms of childcare, and as part of the report you would have had a copy of the Flying Start childcare guidance, is to ensure that this is quality of provision. In terms of the Flying Start, we go out to procurement and follow our procurement procedure in terms of tendering process. We engage with the providers in terms of previously we used to go out to tender at that moment in time when we identified a need for childcare. With the Flying Start, now it's open up on a live dynamic system on procurement, so Flying Start and childcare providers can consider applying at any time. And we hold childcare network meetings. We also bring along existing Flying Start providers to network meetings to talk about the Flying Start offer. As you can see within the report, I have highlighted in terms of the challenges childcare providers have around sustainability. So it is reliant on working with individual providers, because each provider's model, they are a private business, their model will look very different. We have our advisory team and our advisory teacher as well that we offer to go out and speak to childcare providers that are considering, and also when we've identified areas, so for example the project proposal that we put into Welsh Government, we've identified those areas and we know where our childcare sector are at. So the advisory teacher has already been in touch with those providers to talk about the Flying Start offer, to talk about the support that's in place. We've also modelled an up to 3 policy, which previously was for childminders that we had in place. And we've now rolled that offer out to all childcare providers. They can have a taste of Flying Start. They also have the light touch element from us as a service areas as well. And also being mindful that we do potentially have children that haven't taken up their Flying Start place already in a childcare setting, perhaps for their working needs as families. So where that has been quite successful in terms of those children that are in receipt of that funding. So we have been offering that to childcare providers as well. But yeah, there's all forms really, and we've just appointed as well 2 early years officers under the expansion who are going out to family engagement drop-up groups to understand why parents are not taking up their childcare offer if they are in an expansion area, but also they work very closely with our childcare development officers advisory service. So through childcare networks, again targeting those childcare providers that we know potentially maybe we need to work with them in collaboration, but also acknowledging the different challenges each one's face depending on their business model.
Do we have, do we have any sort of a waiting list of people who want to be considered, are there, facing the challenges that we've talked about?
Yeah, so in terms of the process for admission to Flying Start, we've sort of worked with our core admissions team to look at that, and it's an online form. They are families, when they're notified that they are a Flying Start area or Flying Start expansion through the health offer, because health through their visits and would highlight that at their 15-month assessment. They can apply then for their Flying Start place. They are asked to give 2 to 3 choices. We do try and work as best as we can in terms of looking at individual circumstances, family commitments. So sometimes settings can have a waiting list, but that's not to say that we haven't offered a place. It's just parental choice of where they take their place. And like you say, that can be on dynamics of by their workplace. They might have older siblings in school. So we have got waiting lists, but that's due to that not the offer hasn't been made.
I asked that because some of the... So to give an understanding of the questions we asked from you. Anybody else want to come in? Any other officers? Okay. We move on now to question 5, which comes from Councillor Jane Watkins. Jane.
Thank you. Moving on to paragraph 4.23. It states here, all Flying Start childcare and non-maintained settings are required to undertake smooth transitions in and out of childcare and MNS to nursery school. Transitions are not all the same for all settings. So what do we consider to be a smooth transition, and is there a preferred method, and how will the guidance be shared with providers?
Transitions is going to be one of our key focuses and for next year. All those settings that are in receipt of funding and have a warder contract are required to ensure that every child has a transition into their education place. That is monitored by our Flying Start advisory teacher, and we have one officer within that team who monitors those transitions from Flying Start into nursery education. In terms of our non-maintained settings, they do embed the transition, ensure there's transitions in. Transitions can look different depending on each different childcare provider and depending on the number of schools that their children are transitioning to. We've just been undertaking our annual contract reviews with our funded providers, and as part of that review we've been asking them what their transitions look like. Now we have a transition guidance, so that guidance has been written by Welsh Government, and it's a higher expectation in terms of the quality, so ensuring that all children have an All About Me. They have their books and their Flying Start booklets in terms of that information of their baseline in and out of childcare, and we embed the person-centred practice across the service. As part of our meetings that have been taking place, for example, one non-maintained settings, just an example of a really robust transition they've had into their feeder school. But the majority of their children transition into that one school. So they've done a 6-week transition programme, and that's been in collaboration with the school and the setting themselves, where they've been taking the children up doing a session a week over a 6-week period, and then on the last couple of sessions they've been dropping the children off and picking them up. We've just done another visit, and Andy was part of that visit, where we asked the same question in terms of what do your transitions look like, are they working well? And that setting actually transitions into around 7 to 8 primary schools. So transitions can look different, depend on schools as well, sort of capacity to release staff to come out. We've got examples where nursery school teachers come out to the settings. So what we've asked is to put some case studies together so that we can share with schools as well of what examples we have of transitions where they work really well. I'm confident to say that any child in one of those settings who has emerging needs, they would ensure there is a transition in place. They have fed back on occasions that they haven't had a response back from schools, but they will still send that information through. So it can look different, and I think it has to be joint collaboration between the childcare providers and each school.
Just to, thanks, Councillor. Yeah, just to emphasise the point really that when you've got a setting that's feeding into 7 or 8 different primary schools, small number of staff, that capacity to have an enhanced transition is much more complicated than if you're just a setting feeding into one school. So the challenges there around that flow of information and continuity.
Jane, do you want to come back in?
Just very quickly to clarify, so at the end of this process, when you've looked at it, are you then hoping to have a number of good examples of transition? Because one size won't fit all, but you'll be able to say, in this example, these are what we're hoping for.
Yes, so the transition guidance was reviewed this year, which was sent out to all the childcare providers. But we want to sort of include those case studies within that guidance, but also feedback to schools as well of those good examples, but also the challenges schools face, because we need to make sure it's working in collaboration with both the childcare sector and our educational vision.
I'm going to skip to question 8 at the moment because it's really related to the question that and the information you've given us. So I'm going to go to Councillor Seaborn to bring in question 8.
Thank you, Chair. My question on question 8 was, we talked in Education Committee about cluster meetings, and we wondered at the other end, are early years providers included in the cluster meetings? We talked about transition from primary to secondary, but what about early years to primary?
Sorry, just to clarify, are you referring to the ALN cluster meetings?
I think that would be...
Yeah, so in terms of each childcare provider under their Care Inspectorate Wales registration are required to have an ALN code role. This year we focused on developing an ALN forum for our childcare providers, and we've held 2 meetings. What we would like to progress now is to look at how the ALN forum for the childcare providers can link with the ALN forum in school cluster areas. I think that piece of work needs to also be sort of directed and led as well with Claire Williams, our strategic ALN inclusion wellbeing, and we're due to meet with Claire to look at the early years processes. But in terms of how that would work, so very, the cluster meetings around schools, whereas we also got to consider the challenges with our childcare providers in terms of those transitions. A child could be in a school catchment in Glenavon but attending a childcare provision down in the south of the borough. So it's just, again, going back to Andy's point, that they are small in terms of their capacity to release staff, but it's something that we're really keen to develop and strengthen. Because one of the areas as well in terms of transition, we might know of those children very early on in terms of their needs, but we also have to wait for their admissions approval into. So that is something as well that, in terms of the process that we're aware of, but a challenge in itself. But, how we can improve that transition. I mean, those childcare providers on school sites, because we have a number of childcare providers on school sites, have our integrated children, those transitions are enhanced because they are sort of working in collaboration on one site together. But it's working on those models for our providers, not on those school sites, and acknowledging in terms of their capacity as well.
Yeah, I mean, just refer back to the visit that we did together where we were working with talking with a setting, we were working with 7 or 8 primary schools. They were across 3 different clusters. So, again, that's another set of challenges. But we'll find a way of making it work, and I think the ALN cluster forum is probably the best place to establish a start around that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Right, our next 2 questions are from Councillor Colette Thomas.
It's reference to paragraph 4.41. The Early Years Service offers early intervention support for all families across Torvine with children 0 to 4 years. What about children or families that don't or won't engage and then present to school with issues? Are we seeing higher levels of children with needs being picked up in schools? For example, have we seen an uptake in toilet training issues?
So we're seeing an increase in children with speech and language challenges, particularly in schools, and linked to that there's often behavioural issues. Schools in Torfaen haven't raised toileting as a particular issue. I know it has been raised in other local authorities. There may be discrete cases, but it's not something that's been raised with me through meetings. In terms of that, it's something we've actively talked about in that how do we set a clear expectation for parents, but also not set up a policy where it could have a negative impact on the child. We want to look at the well-being of children, so talk specifically about toileting. How can we make sure that if there is an issue that parents are supported in order to toilet train their child, but at the same time, if there's a child in school that does soil themselves, that they are absolutely protected and their humanity is put at the forefront. It's a really difficult balance. We know that there's quite long waiting lists for some medical needs, so that's a difficult challenge again for families who are perhaps waiting for a diagnosis or some medical support, and that's actively being discussed at a national level. So that's quite a broad answer. In terms of Families First, do you want to pick up some of the key issues that are being raised as families?
With toileting, I think there are specialist posts in early years that do support families with that. I think there are now more health visitors as well. There was a shortage of health visitors, and that's now been addressed, I believe, from conversations we've had in the last few weeks. There's no issues with toileting, for example, that come through Families First. I think that's more the health visitor side of things, so it's hard for me to answer that one, to be honest. I have to get more information.
Yeah, we do have a toileting team, toileting constipation team within health. That is on offer to families that need at that moment in time. I think what we are continuing doing, but I think we need to do even further, is push those key messages out in terms of the toilets and guidance, support for families. So we have started doing that on our social media pages, and even with the health visiting contacts. Childcare providers play a real key role in supporting toileting. But we have had feedback from providers as well in terms of parents' expectation. In the wider strategic work as well, Public Health Wales have recently done a survey to define the word school readiness and what does school readiness mean. So that report is due out in around January. So I think that might be sort of helpful as well, because that can mean different things to different services. In terms of, Andrew was talking about the schools sort of coming in, we are seeing a higher number of referrals coming in with speech and language, and we can see a link with the toileting element as well. But we will do a push even further in terms of those key messages to support families, and that is done across the toileting and constipation team within health, and those additional specialist posts that we contribute funding to in health. Colette, do you want to come back in?
Can I ask about the speech and language issues? Is there a waiting list for children who need extra support for speech and language? Or are we managing to cope with the numbers?
I can talk in terms of early interventions. We haven't got any waiting lists for the intervention. The communication pathway into speech core therapy is that they have to have done the first 2 tiers of that support in the first instance. So that has reduced the waiting list in core speech and language therapy, because that is what they would have offered in the first instance. So the parents having access to that early intervention, targeted support. But I can't answer in terms of waiting lists in sort of speech therapy, but we could come back with that in terms of our Flying Start element of it.
Just on the point of toileting and primary schools, we have identified with our school visits that there are more children coming in without being culture trained. So that was picked up in our school visit. Might not be filtered through to you, but questions should be asked, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. Just on engagement with families, what strategies are in place to engage families who initially do not participate in early prevention programmes, and how are these strategies evaluated?
Health visitors undertake a family assessment tool, and they also, in terms of the Welsh Care Levels of Needs, which is a practitioner tool, they'll identify the level of need that family require, so whether they're a universal target or intensive support. So for those families, they will be having intensive support from their health visiting team. In terms of early intervention, we have got our drop-in offer, but we also have our targeted support groups. Obviously, that is in consent with parents at that time, but we also do work closely with our colleagues in social care as well, in terms of, some of our officers are supporting children under CASP and children looked after as part of that offer, and a part of that action plan. So, obviously safeguarding elements, we would follow those procedures, but we work, we try to work preventively, but there are such circumstances that we do work closely with our social housing care colleagues.
Right, can you move on now to the next question, which again comes from Colette.
Thank you. It's relating to paragraph 4.57. One setting has been placed into SDN monitoring. This setting is in local authority monitoring and receiving intensive support from the EAS service. Is this intensive support service seeing an improvement picture at this setting?
Sorry, I didn't catch the end of your question, Councillor. Is the setting progress?
Is this intensive support seeing an improving picture at the setting?
In terms of our monitoring through the award, we're obviously working closely with our Education Achievement Service. So they are in receipt of intensive support from our EAS, and we also monitoring. So we've done a follow-up visit as part of our award of contract to look at the progress made in terms of the recommendations made, and that settings also do a follow-up estimate inspection within the next week. So we'll await that update, and then we will then report back to our strategic leads on that outcome.
Want to come in now? Okay. Comes from Vicky Horner.
Good morning. So I have two questions. So the first part is, do we monitor or provide a different, greater level of offer to our looked after children? And also, do we make our foster carers aware of Families First Flying Start's offer to support the children in their care?
In terms of, response from an early years perspective, for those children in foster care and looked after, if they weren't entitled to Flying Start, they would come into the Flying Start outreach element of it. So if it was a child moving in or moving out, so that offer in terms of that childcare support offer, and like I've just referred to in my previous, that we do work with those families looked after as part of their action plans in terms of that wider concept. I don't know if there's anything that Jacqueline or Kirsty want to add to that.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it was only to add that we hold regular foster carer support groups, and we have been with Charlotte and Emma in Flying Start, just to ensure that our foster carers are aware of the provision and the support available as well.
Lovely, thank you.
Do you want to come in again, Victoria?
No, I've answered the two parts, asked the two parts, and they've been answered.
Okay, thank you. We move on to our next question, which comes from Councillor Colette Thomas, please.
How does early years work together with children's social care to identify areas of greater need or intervention programmes?
Just coming in quickly on that, I think we work really closely with we are part of Children's Services for Families First, so we regularly get cases that are stepped down from MASH, and equally cases that step up. So our data is really intuitive. We know our areas of need, and we've got close relationships with sort of higher level intervention services as well. So that's how we're working with Families First.
You satisfied, Clarence, or do you want to come back in? Anybody else want to come back in? Okay. The last question in this particular session comes from Councillor Seabold.
Thank you, Chair. This question relates to 4.67. Sustainability of childcare is a risk due to recruitment and retention of the workforce. So my question is, what is being done to improve training of early years providers, especially in developing knowledge and skills for working with vulnerable children, children from diverse backgrounds, and in new ways of working, including advancing technology?
We've been doing a piece of work and developed a forum with our regional UK Wales lead, and we have key stakeholders who sit on that group. So our lead for our childcare manager, who oversees the child sufficiency assessment, colleague Gwent, and training providers, looking at the recruitment and retention and the quality of training element. It has been challenging since the pandemic. We've seen less coming into the workforce and for childcare. And we also have reports from our childcare sector in terms of the quality of those officers coming into the sector. We are putting support working with our umbrella organisations. We're also looking at under our early years and development partnership group. That's one of the key themes there. But it is key working with the stakeholders in terms of providing that training. We have been looking at other means in terms of our service area. We can give an example where we took on an apprentice role. That officer did have the requirements, because we also have the challenges of meeting requirements for childcare, CIW requirements, but they didn't have any experience at that time. So we were able to appoint them in an apprenticeship role, and they're now on a fixed-term contract employed with us in Torvine. So we are looking at different ways we can offer that incentive in terms of early years. For our childcare settings, it is a challenge, and especially around the funding elements and the grant-funded elements for the childcare offer, and also for Flying Start offer rates. Obviously, they're a business in their own right and their model. We will give them support from our childcare development officers as well. But it's working with key partnerships across the board.
I'll try not to go off as I say this. Just to add to that as well, Charlotte's a fair amount of preventative work being done to try and mitigate some of these risks. But it is a challenge, no doubt about it, and I think we've seen similar patterns in other areas of education in terms of workforce. But just highlight as well, you held a big celebration event not too long ago. I think that's celebrating the role of childcare in Torvine and making people aware of the good work that they do, and getting those messages out there. We put a lot out through social media around that. The event itself was really well attended. We had representatives from lots of different areas coming to talk about the importance of the role. So I think pushing the messages out there about the importance of childcare and how that can help develop Torvine is important. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, and we've recently rebranded our family information service website as well, so we're intending to put some pop-up videos in terms of practitioners across Torvine, and also the professional learning development, perhaps starting as a childcare worker and then developing to a room leader, progressing. So we're trying to look at some case studies and developing some videos as well of those working in the sector and how they, professional development through the sector as well. So that would be something that we would like to develop.
Years ago, we used to have the careers office going into school. Is that something we really should be promoting to go into our schools? So, people have an idea before they go to college, they're unsure what they want to do. But by going back into the schools, it might enhance the importance and bring children's attention to the need, and might get them a little bit focused on making a decision on a career future.
Yes, and our officers do go out in terms of into schools, into secondary schools. When we're doing we've seen some successful outcomes working with Ysgol Cymraeg, Ysgol Gwynthlew, in terms of where we've had students looking to take on the childcare qualification. We offer placement support, which can be offered across all our childcare sector, and we did also appoint as a result of that as well. So the childcare team and our childcare manager and that working group, and they also work throughout job centres. They're working very close in collaboration with those different services to try and, like you say, promote that workforce.
Rose, you want to come in?
We had a conversation. I understand the play service is within, certainly in the Nankellin provision. But we talked about volunteers when we were on our visit, and I wondered whether or not you could link with the play service to actually, entice volunteers and grow your own service is the best service you can have. If they come in at a young age and then they grow into the service, so, to improve recruitment, retention, volunteers.
That's something we have considered as a service. That does come along with challenges in terms of the requirements under the CIW registration. However, we work very closely with the play service. We have got peer support volunteers that support breastfeeding, which is again another priority under the best start in life objectives. That we're looking to work with businesses in terms of offering training, so they're breast-friendly businesses and that offers for mums feeding. So there is a base of volunteers that we have under our service delivery, but yeah, acknowledge in terms of the work that they do in the play service, but it comes with challenges in terms of that knowledge and experience and how the capacity to manage that as well.
I know we mentioned earlier the review of early intervention and prevention, and there's certainly more of a focus on the community response to needs going forward. So that'll be part of that review and the new sort of structure.
Anybody else want to come in before we move to the next section? To suggest that we keep our recommendations to the end of this meeting. Is everyone okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay. So can we move on to the next section? And the first question comes from Councillor Cowles.
Thank you, Chair. This is in relation to 4.5 of the report. The Phase 2 target for 2024-25 is to make the offer of childcare to 194 new eligible children. The question is, how do you set that target, and is this target realistic and achievable?
We look at the target. The target is actually set by Welsh Government for our phase delivery. And then we look at the areas of need on the contents of data available to us. So we would look at where is the next area of need. Our first focus in terms of expansion areas around that would be those areas that are not 100% coverage with Flying Start, to increase that 100% coverage in the first instance. But they have been set by Welsh Government.
So let's come in again. Leah, you happy? Anybody else? Okay, we'll move on to question 30 from Colette, please.
Phase 2 expansion 24-25 take-up of Flying Start childcare is currently 50%, in comparison to the core Flying Start average take-up of 75%. Why the difference in take-up rates? Do you anticipate the take-up rate of Phase 2 expansion to increase?
Yes, we do acknowledge in terms of the correspondence with the core Flying Start take-up against Phase 2. Again, it depends on that moment in time we rolled out Phase 2 in terms of eligibility of their childcare, because they're offered 3 terms of childcare. So, and that's where it's been key in terms of the 2 new appointments that we've made under a fixed-term contract to work with families and with our early years system across promoting that childcare offer to understand why families are not taking up their place. Some of the reasons around that might be they're already in a childcare provider that isn't a Flying Start area, or they may be also having informal childcare arrangements, grandparents looking after their children. So we are aware that there is a lower rate. What we have done in terms of where we submitted our Phase 3 project proposal to Welsh Government, the first part of that proposal was to look at those areas which didn't have 100% coverage. We've had 40–60%. We've had permission to roll out for this term under that element as well, so that will widen our reach. But it depends on parental choice as well that's factored into that.
And the Welsh Government target is set at 75%. What are we doing to promote an increase of take of Flying Star and achieve our target of 80%?
Yes, we've put a higher target in that was set by ourselves at 80% and the 75% as well. That's our team plan objectives. We've been stable at 75% for a little while, so it's really about that sort of push and drive in terms of that promotion of the childcare, the benefits of the childcare, children coming into childcare. So that is a target that we set ourselves in our team plan because we have been stable with that 75%, which is the national average.
Aiming for 80%.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the 80%. Yeah, the 80% is because we're factoring that there's reasons why parents don't choose. It's not a statutory requirement. You know, we can promote the benefits, and often parents feel that their child isn't ready for childcare. Or they already attending a provision, whether that's a registered childcare provision, which is not Flying Star, or informal childcare.
I challenge and say you can go for 100%, and anything under is really bonus. Okay. So can we move on to our next question then, please? I think Victoria.
Thank you, Jim. So take-up is lower compared to other local authorities across Wales. Have we identified the reasons why, and do we work with other authorities to identify best practice or promotion?
We do work with other local authorities. We work regionally in terms of, and we have got cross-border arrangements in place as well. So those children that are entitled to Flying Start in Torfaen can take their offer outside of Torfaen for their childcare place. So we have tried to look at and widen that reach to be able to obviously increase our uptake of childcare. That's been a significant piece of work, and I'd just like to sort of highlight that regional work was actually took place before Welsh Government announced their cross-border guidance, so that we drove that forward as a region as well. So that gives more opportunities for parents. How that is modelled is that if it was a Torfaen child, we would fund the place, then we liaise with that local authority to ensure that setting is a Flying Start setting, and then that local authority support the setting in terms of the quality insurance of that learning enriched environment.
Okay, Victoria.
Sorry, yeah, in terms of other regional work that we do, in terms of our early years element intervention under the ALN code, we've done some visits down to the Vale to look at their practice in early intervention. And one of the models that they offer families down there, where we had our early intervention, we were offering targeted support, and we do have our drop-in groups for families across Torfaen, but they're drop-in groups. They run a drop-in group for families around if they have concerns with their child's development. Now, families hopefully would have been identified through the health assessment early years core offer and signposted that this is a group that families can just drop in if they've got a concern. And then the early years key support officers then will work with the different collaboration partners around that early intervention support that we can offer. So that's something that we've brought back again from regional work. And again, the other aspect of regional work is the earliest transformational programme, where we've been able to widen our reach to antenatal across the region, so that that's been developed as part of the earliest transformational programme.
So have we brought that best practice from the Vale to Torfaen now?
We have, yes. Those sessions are running, and I know we've had on average about 3 or 4 parents attend. They are new and established. We're only running one at the moment in the mid of the borough, but obviously on demand and need, that's something we can look at. And again, working in partnership with our play service, who also offer our family play sessions, and I know they also run sessions, and also other organisations such as, we've got voluntary organisations such as TOGS, and they're running provision as well that are dropping, and Hope JB is also running provision, which, you know, they've changed the sort of eligibility. So that's a piece of work we're going to look to map what provision is around and ensuring that we're not duplicating but also spreading the offer across the working week as well, and across Torfaen. So that's something we're keen to develop to look at that timetable of programme.
Thank you.
Okay. Are you sure you want to come in? Okay. Well, next question is question 15. Welsh Government's next phase of expansion subject to funding is to provide Flying Star childcare to 476 children in Torfaen who are not currently eligible. Do we have the capacity to achieve this should Welsh Government take this direction?
I think the key thing is that we have put a phased, our project proposal is phased. The challenge that we have is to ensure that we have sufficient childcare places available. So it's really key that we're working with our childcare sector. We've talked about, you know, we've done that up to 3 policy to offer that light touch so they can get some experience of what that Flying Start offer looks like. Challenges in terms of, you know, sustainability of childcare, again, depending on their model of their business, because, you know, you've got Flying Start play groups, and then you've got a day nursery that would have, you know, different pressures in terms of financial. So the rate is an ongoing sort of childcare rate for these programmes. Can be a challenge within that as well. So we've done a phased approach for that first term that we would work with the sector, so to look at the areas that we need to expand our teams as well. We're a very small team, and in terms of the childcare being predominantly around the quality, we have to ensure that we've got that sufficient support for the sector. We have got the Flying Start dynamic procurement as well, which is live, which we, you know, that went out at any time. But it's a phased over a 3-year period to have that full rollout. But again, just like to highlight that those children that are not eligible, we have got a provision in terms of early intervention.
Supplementary. You said about the rate of childcare. It's £6, I think, isn't it, in Torfaen? And yet, Monmouth, Newport and Caerphilly are aiming to raise it to £7, whereas Blaenau Gwent haven't made any decision. Should we not recommend to Welsh Government that there's a universal rate straight across the board, please?
We have tried to work regionally in the past because of those cross-border arrangements that we have a set, you know, and agree at a set rate. We have reached out to our counterparts to look at what they're proposing for next financial year. We are proposing that we do increase the rate. That is depending on our allocation of funding. So through the report you'll see in terms of the childcare offer rate was used to be reviewed every 3 years by Welsh Government, but now they're committed to reviewing it every year. And our education, so that's gone up 20% from the 1st of April, from £5 an hour to £6 an hour. But in comparison to Flying Start, you know, we acknowledge that, you know, that proposal to look at that rate, but it's dependent on our grant allocation.
Okay.
I mean, just quickly going back to the original part of the question, there's no doubt that there's the capability under Charlotte's leadership to roll out phase 3 and supported by Emma and Hayley. It will just be, I suppose, a capacity thing linked to funding, and that's very much dependent on colleagues from Welsh Government and how that rolls through.
This question comes from Councillor Cowles.
Thank you, Chair. This relates to paragraph 4.10 of the report. It states that Torfaen's plans for further phase expansion, obviously subject to funding, will be for those LSOAs that are already covered by greater than 40% to increase these to 100% coverage. Is this achievable, and is this an appropriate use of funding in terms of expanding provision?
In terms of we wouldn't put a proposal forward unless we thought it was achievable. So those in areas that we have got the spaces for those childcare places. But again, we can only project those spaces, determine on where families take up their offer. So we have to look at, you know, at that offer across Torfaen and our what spaces we have available. But we are confident that we can do that, and I've just highlighted that since that we've done this report, we are actually starting that offer out now this term to increase that coverage across those local authorities. So we started a little bit earlier, but in readiness for that announcement in phase 3. Does that answer your question?
Okay. Thank you for your questions. I understand you have to leave before 11:30. Yeah, so thank you for your attendance. And okay. Next question comes in from Councillor Jane Watkins. Jane, please.
Thank you. Yeah, with reference to paragraph 4.18, it says, as vacancies have reduced, there has been a big increase in these reviews during the last year. How are we supporting the work to fill these vacancies and ensure that long-term stability in this provision and take-up of reviews?
So we have seen that we're reducing the vacancies for health visiting in both Flying Start and our generic service. We have been working with health colleagues where just after the pandemic we looked at different ways of incentive into the health visiting role. You have to be a qualified nurse to be able to be a health visitor. Elements of that, they were looking at the community practitioner role within the health service, so to upskill that practitioner in terms of the health visiting. However, the guidance changed around that, and they had to go to university for their training, so they were open to doing house. What we're seeing is they're coming back now to us in April. So even though that that model was put in place in terms of Councillor Rosemary, in terms of that grow your own model, that's what health visiting services have developed, and then I've seen those come back into the health visiting service in Torfaen as of April. But in terms of those contacts, we have seen an increase. I think due to the vacancies in health visitors, they looked at a different model of offer to families. So they were offering drop-in clinics or clinics by appointments. And obviously for your families that are more intensive, they would do the home visits, but those that are targeted universal rely on coming to appointment-based. We're now nearly to full capacity in Flying Start, and I think there's about a 2.4 vacancy in generic, whereas they're now going back to do the clinical visits in the home. So there would be a cohort of children that may have been sort of year 3-year-olds now that would have had a different offer in terms of that universal, but from, we're now seeing those visits undertaken, so we're confident that that isn't going to be a challenge going forward.
Supplementary?
Yeah, I have a supplementary question with that. So the percentage sees a drop-off by the 27-month review. Have we identified reasons why and how we can address this?
That's something we probably have to come back to you in more detail from our health colleagues in terms of that percentage. They've just reported an increase because of their capacity. The 27-month review, all children under the Health Child Wales are offered that as part of that core early years programme, but I'd have to go back for more detail in response to that.
Yeah, that would be good if you could. I think it would be interesting for us to see what's happening there, if there are, what the reasons are behind that. Yeah. Thank you.
Next question, please, Victoria.
Thank you, Chair. So my question is related to 4.28, where you've listed the evidence-based intervention that you offer. And then in 4.29, you said that feedback from parents has been positive, very positive. My question is, do we record outcomes for each group or intervention so we can identify what's working well and what may not be as effective, or use of our time and resources?
Yeah, sorry, if I can just jump in around, is this just around parenting or is it holistically? But in terms of parenting, every group that, sorry, frog in my throat, every group that we run, we do get feedback from all the families that attend. So we know which particular programmes are more effective than others, which ones are better attended, what works, what doesn't. So our parenting groups are really well evidenced and reported on.
Is that parental feedback, or is that outcome measures of the intervention?
It's parental feedback in terms of what has helped them from the parenting programmes.
Okay.
And then in terms of families first, or in terms of our interventions, so our model is that families go through an assessment of around 24 areas, and they score themselves and where they are from 1 to 5. And at the end of the intervention reviews, they then rescore themselves as to where they are. So we know exactly where families have seen improvements and where they benefit from the intervention. So that's part of our regular reporting for families first. There's a lot of data around that.
Okay.
I just come in there just in terms of the, and like Simon said, is that they are evidence-based programmes. We do complete a pre and post questionnaire, so they are outcome-based in terms of our programme delivery. So all families will complete for our evidence-targeted programmes a pre and post questionnaire where they just score themselves in terms of where they think they are in terms of their parenting. So we have got that outcome-based data.
Thank you very much.
Jane.
I have indeed, thank you. Yeah, I think sort of following on from that, looking at the figures in 4.45, the early intervention support 2023-24 outcomes, are we satisfied with the response rate of people filling in the pre and post evaluations, and how can we improve those rates? Sorry, as a supplementary, a small supplementary, should we clarify that the percentage reporting a positive outcome is a percentage of the people who responded, not necessarily the people who completed the offer?
So the percentage that we're reporting on is those that would have completed the programme and who completed a pre and post evaluation.
Yeah, I think we understood that. We did have to look at it a couple of times when we were clear on that, but then we weren't sure. Just as an example, if you look at the first one, 100% positive outcome, that's clearly a brilliant positive outcome, but it's not 100% of the people that took the course. It's 100% of the people that completed the evaluation, which is less than half.
So those 207, they may be sort of midpoint view, so I think that's the overall figure. So yeah, I acknowledge your point that you've made this. The 207 of those numbers for families who have been signposted and engaging with us for early intervention. The programme is a rolling programme, so it depends on that moment in time. So that 23-24 data of those 207 may be rolling over into the next financial year.
Please go in.
Yeah, I just took note. We'll have a look at that because there's something about have people dropped out or etc. So yes, there's probably a better way of reflecting it. So yeah.
Yeah, because we did feel there's probably valuable data in there, but we weren't sure that we were really seeing it. Thank you.
Yes. We'll move on to our next question, which comes from Councillor Caroline Price.
Thank you, Chair. My question is 4.45, Early Intervention Support 23-24 Outcomes. Is the total the number of the individual families, or within that total, are there a number of families that may be involved with more than one intervention group, or so be double counted?
Sorry, I've lost my way a little bit. Yeah, sorry, families can be involved in more groups. They could be having a family parenting support intervention in early language, but the data sets that we monitor would be reported separately. So it could be that they are accessing the two elements of the different offer that we have with Blind Start. But in terms of that table delivery there, you're looking at early language support and your parenting, so they could be having some early intervention language support with their child, but they could also be attending a parenting family support programme for parenting.
Thank you.
You happy?
Yes, thank you, Janet.
Come in, so I'll go back to Victoria for question 21, please.
Thank you, Chair. So in 4.53, you comment that there's a significant increase in the number of requests for emerging needs over the last 2 years. So how are we managing this significant increase in demand, and how are we planning for longer term increases in ALM presentation so we can support our children and families at earlier stages?
In terms of the early intervention element of the ALN, we have seen a significant increase in terms of, and particularly around social, emotional and language and communication. We obviously, our offer of support is around intervention targeted support groups that all families can access. We're also putting key messages out there in terms of the Welsh Government's communication key messages out on social media as part of transition and in every contact as well, in terms of that health visiting contact is promoted. In terms of the ALN aspect of it, I think that's something that I'll pass over to Andrew.
So there is an ALN scrutiny next week. So Claire and William Simon, you head of service, will probably be able to give more detail next week. But we are reviewing the staffing structure and the provision that we've got for ALN to recognise the 0 to 25 remit that we now have. We recognise that we need to strengthen the preschool and the post-16 elements of our central provision, and Claire is working on a plan to address that. We also don't want to just focus on investing in additional specialist places. Is that early identification, advisory support, and prevention work to have early intervention to try and stop the needs escalating. Linked to that, we've adjusted the mainstream ALN funding formula for schools. So that's now going to be based on the number of pupils within a school, the number of learners with IDPs, plus a deprivation element using the WIM data. From the modelling we've done, that looks like more resource will be moved from secondaries into the primary sector. So we're taking steps, but it's an early stage, and I think it's probably worth a wider discussion next week.
Yeah. Okay.
Again, I think we'll probably raise this next week in a bit more detail, but we're also looking at, rather than having ALN strategies, teaching and learning strategies for this, that, trying to bring everything together holistically so that there's just one single message around approach, and that will definitely form part of addressing early needs from maintained all the way through to post-16. But again, there's a lot more work going on in the background now.
More
Thank you.
aligning it to the prevention. Yeah, thank you. We look forward to that next week, all of those. Okay. Next comes from, the next two questions actually come from Councillor Rose Seaborn. Rose.
Thank you. This question relates to 4.70 in your report, and it's about early years recognises the need to improve current systems. How are we using data and performance information to develop and improve our early years strategy and service delivery?
We have our early years team plan, and we also submit regular reports into our leadership in terms of the different programmes and developments and our outcomes within that. In terms of systems, we are on a different system in terms of our reporting from education, but I know again that is part of the early intervention programme work, where they're looking at a single view of the child, which I know that is a medium-term programme of work. In terms of measures and outcomes, we do obviously have that system in terms of our Welsh Government requirements, what we have to submit to Welsh Government on a termly basis, but we are looking at developing those long-term outcome impacts. It is challenges for in early years because we're early intervention, and there's lots of intervention that families are accessing in Torfaen, but how we measure that impact in terms of are we preventing into statutory service is the response that is around research. The programmes are heavily research evidence-based programmes, but to measure those sort of long-term impacts and outcomes, that could be a challenge for us in early years.
Just add to that, a bit like primary schools, I think, where we look at we used to have outcome data in primary schools, that no longer exists. So what are we looking at instead? And we've spoken in education scrutiny about that previously around lesson observations, ESTIN inspection reports, listening to learner activities, talking to parents. I think that can be replicated or is replicated in the earlier setting as well. So ESTIN Care Inspector Wales will visit the setting. We use that in their recommendations. What threads and themes are we seeing there coming out? replicating a similar sort of process there about looking at the quality of information and the small amount of quantitative information that we've got. And I think within the Directorate, our monitoring, evaluation and reporting cycle that we run as a calendar is really important for Charlotte and the team to generate those reports for us, to consider next steps, and for us to be able to challenge the team and ask, what are you actually going to do about addressing this? How is that going to influence your next team plan? And so on and so forth.
Just to build on what Andy has said, later this term in March we've got a joint Children and Families Leadership Away Day. So part of that, Jacqueline and I have started to talk about joint opportunities for joint monitoring and evaluation, joint sharing of data. In the Children and Families meetings that we've had so far, we've shared various reports that have been written in education for elective home education, children missing from education. So there's a stronger shared approach to data across the Directorate, but we recognise we want to continue to build that. Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Rose, I think you've got the next question.
Yeah, partly been answered, but who has the responsibility for and how is the progress of families and children interacting with our early years services monitored and tracked? And how do we know that interventions and support are having a tangible impact on the progress of the child by the time they start school? Want me to repeat that? It's a bit of a mouthful. Who has the responsibility for and how is the progress of families and children interacting with our early years services monitored and tracked? And how do we know interventions and support are having a tangible impact on the progress of the child by the time they start school?
Yeah. So in terms of note, obviously transition is really key, as we've just spoken about earlier, in terms of that early identification, whether from a health assessment visit that they need secondary sort of referrals into sort of specialist provision. So I think transition is really key, that plays a part in that, and you touch base in terms of that. It's got to work in collaborations with our childcare sector and our teams. In terms of the early intervention programmes that we offer, I think we've got a strong offering to Irvine in terms of what we're offering early intervention wise. It is reliant on family engagement. It is an offer, yeah, I don't know if Simon's got anything to sort of.
Yeah, just around the risk of sounding repetitive, the review of early intervention and prevention, this is one of the things that is at the heart of it. So there will be one front door into services rather than each service or provider having their own front door. There should be a move to sort of one record as much as possible, although there's some challenges with that. There is the community response to meeting need, and we should be more data rich from having this in one place. So these are all things that happen in the future, but that's the direction of travel for early intervention.
I think, sorry, just one thing to sort of just highlight as well as part of the Earliest Transformational Programme, we have a regional WASPI agreement in place in terms of information sharing processes. That's been really key to drive as well, so that we can share that relevant information in the best interest of those children and helps with that process and system.
Thank you. Councillor Coles has another meeting, so we'll excuse him. So we'll give him a couple of minutes before he leaves. Yeah. Thanks, Liam. Okay. Okay. We come to the end of that section, and we'll bring our recommendations to the end of the meeting. So we'll go off to question 24, which relates to funding. And Councillor Seaborn, come in, please.
Thanks. We touched on funding as well earlier on, but the question is core funding minimal compared to grant funding when early intervention and prevention is a key determinant in educational outcomes, health outcomes, children's social care, employability, and one of our key well-being objectives, etc. So how can we ensure financial stability longer term for our early years provision? We need the money to be put in there.
The fact is linked to the first Marmot principle is the first objective in the county plan. I think it's high profile. I don't know what else to say. It is like it's high profile. It's for high up front. If there were to be a cut from Welsh Government, I'm sure elected members would be quite vocal about it.
Can we actually promote that they actually look at extra funding? We've got increased numbers. We've got, you know, is it up to us to lobby for that funding? That's what I'm saying. Thank you.
Yes. Right. You see, question 25 has already been answered, so I'll go on to question 26. Does ALN funding allocate to a child transfer with that child when they move into school? If they're in the early years provision or business, does that funding go with them to a primary or a foundation level, please?
We are responsible for the early intervention element, so it would be those children identified with emerging needs. So we don't have ALN funding. What we do is through our early intervention, if they have an emerging need, then we utilise the funding available to us. It is challenging and complex. In terms of Flying Start, for those children that are funded for childcare place, if they were identified with an emerging need, then they would be supported with assisted funding if it was that they had to have an enabling adult to support them to access that provision. For the childcare offer for Wales, there is a sister support grant as part of that funding. We funded post in Torfaen as part of the early years transformation and going into implementation. The value of funding that we had wasn't sustainable, but we felt that if we had a post, then it could support the sector and childcare sector in the workforce, offering the training, supporting the strategies in terms of the person-centred practice implementation. We also provide ALM module training as part of our training offer on a termly basis, because we are aware that of that high turnover of staff in the childcare sector. So again, if there was a child with a childcare offer, we do sometimes put business cases in. We're sufficient enough to Welsh Government. We've just submitted one now for this financial year. So it is dependent on grants, and also it's dependent if the parents are eligible for the childcare offer for working parents. So that's where the Flying Start outreach element of funding comes in, that we look at our early intervention panel. What we're looking at, we probably potentially do need to look at the guidance for next year and review it. We reviewed it this year because of the pressures on funding elements to provide that. So we brought it in line with the childcare offer under the early intervention, in line with the 2-year-old childcare. So any child 0 to 2 would be provided with an early intervention programme, or that could be one-to-one support in the home. But until we have our allocations for this year, we may have to review the funding under that element for next year as well.
So then in terms of school funding, there's 5% of school budgets should be spent on ALN learners. In addition to that, there's 4.6 million that goes into our schools for ALN support. I mentioned the revised funding formula, so that will kick in from April. So we're trying to move away from funding being attached to an individual child to give schools greater flexibility with their small group, their targeted support and their universal support for learners. So it is a slightly different funding mechanism, but what we're trying to create is flexibility for schools to flux their provision based on the learners that they've got at that point. Key for them is knowing what learners are coming so they can prep. And that transition that Charlotte's talked about previously, that's key for them to enable to plan their staffing for September.
Pressure on school budgets, isn't there? Unless we're waiting for additional funding from Welsh Government for particular cases. Yeah.
Just to add to that, maybe a bit of wider context as well. The offer that sometimes is available through early years Flying Start childcare setting groups are smaller, the needs can be met in different ways, and it's that transition sometimes into primary school where they might already have something in place that doesn't need to continue, but flip that round, it might be something that does need to start. So Andrew's point about flexibility funding based on that transition point and how need changes according to what provisions are required is really, really important.
As I said, it's a source of concern, but it's all about working together, isn't it, and collaboration. Okay. Our next question is last, but John, do you want to come in on anything? No problem. Just didn't want to miss you out. Our next question, which is last but one, comes from Councillor Watkins.
Thank you. Yeah, moving on to Appendix 1, CSA gaps analysis, which lays out a number of themes and recommendations. To what extent have we addressed the recommendations set out in the report in Appendix 1, and are there any areas that require greater focus or pace with addressing?
So the gaps analysis is the themes that come out from the 5-year childcare sufficiency assessment undertaken, and those recommendations are embedded in our childcare action plan. That childcare action plan is reviewed on an annual basis. All those themes are quite key priorities, but the ones that, and I think I've made reference to, was around the working group looking at retention and recruitment into childcare workforce, looking at sort of the funding elements and also sustainability of childcare. And it does change, you know, from sort of the 5-year to the next 5-year, and it's really key that we monitor that on an annual basis. And I would say the key themes for us is around that sustainability, recruitment and retention staff, which the new group that's, you know, working with key partners of looking how we can sort of enhance you know, people coming into that workforce as well. So I don't know if that's answered your question.
Yeah, no, I think it does. So specifically because you've raised retention and recruitment there, and I know with that recommendation there were percentages attached to it. Do we think that they're realistic percentages? Are we aiming towards those?
We are aiming towards those, but again, I think they need to be they are reviewed on a termly basis as part of our sort of review of the action plan. You know, we have got a committed childcare workforce that, you know, are leading on those themes. Our childcare development officers support businesses, and our childcare workforce, our childcare manager as well. That is part of her sort of day-to-day work. You know, the scope can change, but it's dependent on they are local businesses as well, so things could happen day to day, but we're all there to respond to. So it is sort of an ongoing, commitment. We've got, Sandy's just saying, we've got sustainability funding, but we don't promote that out in terms of, because it's identified by our childcare development officers or our advisory team working with that provision at that time. So setting, you know, and we also have our small capital grant, you know, that does come to an end this financial year, but it's been a substantial amount of funding coming into the sector, and which hopefully then has given childcare providers, you know, a release on the other sort of pressures within their sort of finance day to day, where they've been able to utilise the small grants capital funding as well. And that small capital grant would look at, again, for example, if they're non-maintained education, what are the recommendations within their estimate reports, what are their recommendations in their CIW reports, what is their action plans, what's in their setting development plans, so that, you know, that really supports that process as well. So hopefully, you know, I know the sector has welcomed that, and, you know, hopeful that, you know, that might continue as well beyond April, but that's been quite significant for our childcare sector.
Okay, thank you. No, it's good to know it's under regular review, not just very broad review. Okay, thank you.
And you're probably pleased to know some last question. Have we identified any barriers to families accessing early years provision? And if so, what support do we offer to mitigate that?
We have had barriers for families attending. I can give some examples where we get to know our communities really well in Torfaen, and there's different barriers and challenges within our communities across Torfaen. Blaenavon is a very well-driven led community base, so for provision up there we very work with existing provision in Blaenavon area. It's a small area, but we work with our services, they're community driven, I would say, in terms of Glenavon. But we have families that may be due to housing be placed up in Glenavon, but their family support is down at Cwmbran, so they would like to attend those early intervention programmes down at Cwmbran. So we do have, we are able to support them with transport elements there for our hard-to-reach families. So we've also had officers go out and do bus journeys as well, where families haven't caught the bus. So, you know, we've had examples of that. So our family workers and early language support workers through the transformational programme, we've given them a little bit more autonomy in terms of that understanding of what matters. Obviously, it needs to be sustainable and it needs to be in our resource base and capacity. Also, that joint facilitation with health programmes that we hope to see improve now following next year with their full capacity of vacancies, is that if they've had that health contact, they know they're coming into an intervention where they know a face, that makes a difference to our families as well. So in terms of I don't think there's barriers in terms of childcare, and then it's parental choice, but it is an offer. And if it is in terms of access in a group, then there's a tense family, then we will offer that model of one-to-one support within the home.
Thank you, Ms. Supplementary, please. How are we approaching the request from parents who may want to, who are taking up the Welsh medium and want to access something like the Maithrin? And the difficulty getting there, they don't have transport. Example, in this area, I think the local provision of Welsh medium is in the Maithrin in Aberystwyth, but not everybody knows about it, and some people with disadvantages have issues of transport getting there. So, and also my second supplementary, quickly, is in the report we read about parents querying that they start work at 7 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock. The lack of provision, but that obviously will impact on childcare providers. And have we got people who want to start opening their businesses at 7 o'clock in the morning and work till 7 o'clock in the night? You know, are we absorbing all that information and queries that's being targeted to us, please?
So Charlotte leads on our Welsh Education Strategic Plan Objective 1, which is about early years. So she's probably the best person to figure out the development of Welsh medium childcare provision, plus about how we're trying to boost numbers of general Welsh medium learners. So happy to start.
Yeah, so leading along outcome one of the West budget, and that's working in key partnership with our umbrella organisations such as Mudiad. We've looked at the Welsh medium offer across Torfaen. We have 2 Cilth Maithrins down in the south of Cwmbran, and we have existing provision in Pontypool, and we've also developed provision upon Ysgol Ponteg and Ysgol Gwynthil school site. In the north of the borough, that particular sort of query is that we have got an English medium provider out within that area offering Flying Start. We've developed a Cilth TFE group because it's around that promotion, as you say, and also that early years journey. So working with ourselves, the local authority, we have officers and an officer from Mudiad will be advising the Cilth TFE and engaging with families to understand and to promote the Welsh medium journey and provision. And the nearest sort of Cilth TFE in terms of is Aberystwyth. So we know there's 2 families there that would like and are interested in taking up their Flying Start Welsh medium childcare provision. So for us, that's a barrier in terms of how we're going to manage that in terms of access. But also, it's not a statutory requirement, because with statutory requirement, they would have transport. So we've reached out to Welsh Government and said that, you know, would they support us, you know, if working with the families and working with the settings, because that setting does do wrap around and has transport for their 3 and 4-year-olds into education. Would they support us if we were to fund that transport element, if parents were engaged with it and the childcare setting could provide it, because they have to meet their CIW registration. Welsh Government are very keen to support us with that element of it. So now we're just at the stage of approaching and working with that setting. So we are looking at, but also we need to look at the long-term element of that. So we work very closely with the forward planning officer, looking at that availability of education, but also how early years Welsh medium provision fits into that. We've done a lot of work on our Flying Start website, which we've rebranded with some key messages, some videos as well in terms of the benefits of Welsh. So that they also now link to direct to our local authority website and officers, and we also have managed to recruit Welsh medium speaking officers in our advisory team as well. And again, that's a challenge in the childcare workforce, alone in terms of recruitment and retention, but also employing a childcare provider. And that's where our strong links with Ysgol Gwynslow, working with the secondary school there, those that going through the childcare qualification, offering childcare places in Welsh medium settings. And as well, you said about the childcare in terms from 7 till 7, and that's something that would be monitored under the childcare sufficiency assessment in terms of ensuring that are we meeting demand for supply, but we also have to have sufficient evidence there is a need for that to be sustainable. So the offer is there across Torfaen. Some challenges across Torfaen could be a little bit more challenging, but we're doing our utmost to remove those barriers. And if we see a need that there's an increase that that is required in the north of the borough, then we need to look at predominantly we always like to work with our existing providers, but if not, then we need to look at developing something in the north of the borough.
Thank you. Anybody else want to come in?
Yeah, just as a supplementary, it'd be interesting to see the improvement in numbers from Gwynslow, the 3 to 18 school. So you've got early years up there as well as...
Yes, we have got childcare up at the school, which was part of that school development and capital grants into early years, and we are offering that from birth on a small sort of 3. I think we have babies registered places up there, but and I think it helps being as well, especially with the challenge we have with our employment of Welsh-speaking practitioners being in that community. They are part of the training element supported by Mudiad, but being in that school community as well enriches that language.
Yes. Come ahead. Well, that comes to the end of our questioning. We'd really like to thank you all for your attendance and for the welcome again from Emma and all the staff at the site. Before we start to make our recommendations, do you have any summary statements that you want to make to us before we, because before you can have your coffee, which you probably earn.
Just really welcome having a joint children families education group. I think it's a really good experience. Even writing the reports together was really helpful. We're a relatively new directorate, so it's really helpful. So thank you for this opportunity.
It's an experience for me, I can show you. But it's worked well because we work as a really good, 2 committees really work well together. So perhaps it's the start of future meeting grows. But thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think now is the time we can hand over to Rebecca, who can help us formulate our recommendations. So, okay.
Thank you, Chair. So just to remind members, the Joint Education and Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committees are invited to review the information contained within the report and the responses that you've received today, and to determine if the early years provision is effective in giving children the best start in life and the effectiveness of the offer of early intervention provision across Torfaen delivered by the Early Years Service, and then to consider annual grant allocations for sustainability of early intervention provision, and then finally and overall to make recommendations to the executive member for education and children and families on areas of further focus or priority. So if I can open up to the committee to offer your recommendations, and then I have a couple of notes as well later.
The report is very thorough. I think the provision is excellent, but as with everything else, there's always room for improvement, especially with the numbers of early intervention that are coming to the forefront, and those identifying with ALN needs. So I think that we have to ensure that there is enough provision to make our intervention sustainable, because, as I said, and some of it is relying on core funding, which makes the whole process not sustainable if grant funding is effective. So I think we need to prove the Welsh Government that we need funding to proceed in what we're doing. And as you said, especially identification now with the Welsh medium, that we have to implore Welsh Government that we need funding for this as well. That goes?
Yeah, I think we've got a recommendation at 3-4 Bex with regard to promoting the phase 3 delivery.
Yeah.
And to ask the executive member to promote and recommend to Welsh Government.
Yeah. Also concerned, and we spoke about this in all meetings, about the lack of recruitment for speech and language in our schools. So that's a recommendation how we're going to promote recruitment for these particular areas. Again, that should be funding. And I think Victoria wants to come in, don't you?
Hello. Something that I have observed today is that a lot of the report and our questions needed a health response as well, to understand the collaborative working and how we are targeting intervention and early years, and for recommendation for health, a representative from health to sit on the panel to answer some of our questions.
Yeah. Thanks, Vicky. I think we brought this up in our earlier pre-agenda and in our schools visit. And also what was notably absent, that we said about a parenting website, because they said that I think that could be a recommendation as well, because we said the voice of the parent wasn't always being heard. Okay.
Do you want me to come in and perhaps,
yes,
if I go through some of the notes, and then it might sort of more structure to what members want to recommend. So through the course of your discussions, I think it was Councillor Seaborn that raised the issue about the cluster work and the ALN forums, and there being a more joined-up link with that and a greater priority on that. There was the issue around, although they did come back and say that they were going to push out more comms with regard to guidance for parents. So although they said the toileting training wasn't so much an issue, there was issues around speech and language, so they did say that perhaps that they could increase promotion of those.
I think,
yeah.
Did they do a survey of schools to find out what the gaps or the needs are?
Sorry. They did say that in various visits we had last week that there are some issues with parenting, and that they were going to encourage parenting to come in for parenting skills, because we said it was not like the older days when you learned how to do it. But it's really not nice when children are not entirely trained when they're going into primary school or even.
I think, to be fair, Andrew did come in and say that they haven't had that fed back from the school, so that is a particular issue in Torvine. The issues that they are predominantly seeing in our schools is speech and language. So, I think,
speech and language.
You mentioned the social emotional
behaviour. If we make a recommendation regarding the speech and language, but also that we need to be kept updated on the issues of toiletry within our schools, because that's a concern that's coming to all of us as members.
I think you can widen it so that it's parental support for any issues inside it.
Can I just ask on that? Would that be a reason for the lack of engagement with some parents, that because their child hasn't reached that stage of being toilet trained, they don't engage with early intervention? Because you've got 3 questions on here, which all really means the same, I thought to myself. But question 6 from Colette about the lack of engagement. And then we go on to page, on question 14 from Victoria about take-up, which is the same issue really. And then the last question on 28 that you asked, Janet, have we identified the barriers to it? So all those questions relate to one another really. And there wasn't a real answer to all of them, I didn't think. But that needs to be addressed, I think.
But we can tie that into that recommendation with regards to concerns that issues that may arise that may need support from parental issues may be what is creating a barrier and creating issues.
That's right.
So, yeah, we can word it that way.
Children being school ready.
Yeah. Okay, so there was that one. Councillor Jones, you've just raised the other one with regards to recruitment into childcare. Obviously, they said they've done the celebration events, etc., and they do go into schools. But I'm sure there's always opportunities to explore further links.
Apologies. I know there's issues on safeguarding, etc., and a certain amount of training that has to be done. But that can be done. That's done without play service, and it can be done. And I think we had a discussion at one of the settings that they should link more with our comprehensive schools and our homegrown childcare. Route, I suppose, into that employment. Yeah. Yes, of course, can. And I think apprenticeships as well needs to be picked up. That can be picked up with the learning zone. And
Thank you. There was also the one then Councillor Watkins raised with regards to exploring the gaps in the table for the parental feedback and perhaps more, sort of accurate recording of or a reflection of what the information is showing us in that table. And then there was just the final one that I noted about the sharing of data, greater sharing of data between children's services and education, now that they were under one directorate and they have an away day, etc., but greater links between the. I did also note an action point that Councillor Watkins raised with regards to question 17 and about the health visits and the reviews, the percentage for the reviews of health visitor take-up, because it drops off at 27 months and 3 years. So they said they would speak with health and get that response for you.
Yeah. Other thing we picked up as well is when we were visiting last week was the during COVID or since COVID, the low numbers of health visitors, and we said that now they're starting to come back. But is this generally across the board, and is it going to be something, especially with proposed cuts for nursing, is that going to affect the number of health visitors available going to our schools? So I don't know how we can round that up, but that's of course a concern as well.
More of a question.
More of a question.
So I'll perhaps pop it
as
a concern,
a comment of concern for low numbers of health visitors.
Finally, a comment or a recommendation on question 13, Colette's question, about promoting Flying Start, the childcare offer. I think it needs to increase the numbers. We need to be promoting it, and we don't see a lot of promotion about early years, do we? I remember when my great-grandchild was born and the need for their apologies.
I'm just going to make a comment. I don't know. Sorry, Jane, go on. Sorry. I just...
So when just previously when we were talking to lost my thread now. What were we talking about before Rose commented?
Promoting Flying Start.
No, before that. Oh, health is the numbers. Yeah. Is there not a recommendation in there then about, I don't know, about something that they can do to get more health visitors? And we recommend. You know, with me. Do you know what I mean?
No, I am. Yeah. It's just obviously I think that is more of a health board remit than the local authority being able to access that, because obviously there's certain routes, isn't there, that health visitors have to take now. Because I know they were working with them on one of the visits, and they explained that they changed it, wasn't it? It wasn't just based on work experience. They were having to send them off to university then for a course, and it sort of took a lot of their workforce away.
Which the announcement last night was a concern. The announcement last night with the Cardiff University cutting nursing is a concern if they have to do a nursing qualification before they can become a health visitor.
Spoke about is that to urge our executive member to get Welsh Government to put a universal rate for childcare. Said that Monmouth and Newport and Caerphilly going 7, I think we have to really get Welsh Government to do universal rates right across the board.
So sorry, I might have answered this question when you asked it. So who decides the rate? Does each individual, who decides the rate that they get for childcare then in each area?
Each area.
Yeah, who though? Who? The local authority, the health authority, the local authority.
Yeah. Because Monmouth are raising 7, Caerphilly is voting.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I just wondered who decided that rate.
Individual authorities.
So the local authorities do.
Obviously, it could be subject to the budget they get or the allocation from Welsh Government. But I think from listening to people and talking to individuals, healthcare at the current rate is not going to be sustainable. At £6, not even £7, it's hardly sustainable. So we really need to promote this as a universal rate across Wales.
So we're asking Welsh Government for more funding so that we can raise our rates.
To raise for Welsh Government to do statutory, that's a standard rate across the board. Because as I said, we talked to so many, haven't we? And they said that the current rate for childcare is definitely not sustainable. I spoke to the local private providers in Blenavon, and they said, can't you do anything to raise the rate? Sorry, I just don't understand this. So we're not asking Welsh Government for more funding then, because if they don't give us more funding, we're not going to be able to.
That would be what.
That's what we're asking for then. Yeah, is more funding from Welsh Government so that we can afford to raise them. Yeah. Okay.
What I would say is that obviously they did come back on that point and explain the difficulties in implementing a universal offer, and I think that would be extremely difficult on a Wales-wide basis. So I don't know whether you wanted to sort of pull it back a bit and just sort of on a regional basis may make it more achievable. I think there's obviously very different circumstances in somewhere like Cardiff to then implement the standard.
Yeah, I would support that, but I think that we need to get the point over. Do you?
I think regional is a better because we can. It's our borders, and if we're charging lower than another, they'll obviously come into us and use our. Another bit funding follows it.
Just to come in on that point, I guess what we're really asking for here is for equality of access to services when we're thinking about how much each borough charges. So I think if we position it as this is an equality issue for our families and early education, early years services, it's a stronger point from us.
Get my words out. Colette, you want to come in?
About on the gaps analysis that Torvine done, it's dated 2022. Could we have an update on that then, please? Because there's some actions in there dated from 22 to 27. So we'd be halfway through that. So could you have an update on the 12 recommendations?
If I pop that on the action sheet, and then perhaps they can do a briefing note for you to update you. Is that okay? Yeah.
Thomas? Anybody else want to come in? Jane, come on.
No, it just struck me, and I could be thinking about the wrong thing, but after we did our visits that we said this would be good for a seminar? Yeah,
that's what that is. Yeah.
We did talk about this because childcare provision throughout the borough is important, and although we sit on the education and children and families, I think it really should be out into all the members, because they have a responsibility, because we are corporate parents after all. So I don't know what your thoughts are.
So rather than a recommendation, because obviously that's a gift for you as members, you can request a seminar. I'll take that up with the team and with Democratic Services.
I think it's useful to know the pressure that our services are under. And as I said, if any children are in need, they come to us as corporate parents, won't they, Rose?
How do we, this childcare sufficiency assessment is 2022. So how often do they renew that? And that could possibly be brought to a member's.
That's a big college as well.
Just could be minutes actually somewhere. Our thanks to the visits that we had, some of the private providers, and the ICC, etc. It was really, really useful, and thank you for giving us the time, especially the nursery that we went to, Victoria and myself went to nursery. And we really given a really good welcome, and thanks very much.
Yeah, I'll pop across a formal note or letter on behalf of the two committees to all the teams involved. Thank you.
And also to our scrutiny officers, both Geraint and Dex, who really put up with all our questions. And Geraint had to put up with me because I wasn't sure to get to thank Ellen. So, yeah, we owe you both a big thanks as well. Okay? So that concludes the end of our meeting. Thank you to everybody who's taken part, for all the questioning we've raised today, and of course the visits that we've had over the last few weeks. They've been really important and really have an impact on our two meetings. So it only takes now to thank you all and close this meeting, unless anybody else has anything to bring up. Okay? Good gosh, it's 12:05.